Bub Carrington, Pittsburgh guard, 6'5" in shoes, 195 came in at the combine. 6'8" wingspan, 18.9 years old on draft night. He is the youngest domestic prospect in the draft. So I think Saloon is younger, Topic, maybe Pacome, I think might have been a little younger, but outside of the foreign guys, he is the youngest domestic prospect. Averaged 33.2 minutes per game this year, 13.8 points per game, 5.2 rebounds, 4.1 assists to just 1.9 turnovers, 0.6 steals, 0.2 blocks. Shot 41.2% from the field, 32.2% from three on 6.1 three-point attempts, 78.5% on free throws on 2.8 attempts per game. True shooting, 53. Effective field goal, 49.6. PER, 16.3. BPM, 3.9. That 195 was a pretty good number for him weighing in at the combine. I'm not going to lie. I thought it was going to be, I think I said like long sleeve guys maybe, come in weighing a little less than you would think. And he came in, I think, better, than I thought. He weighs the same as Ron Holland does. So, I thought that was a positive for him for sure. And if you look at it, he's got like broad shoulders and they get hidden a little bit in the shirt, but so decent frame there. Stock price preseason, or at least, the Draft Act IPO. So this was very, very early in the season when this dropped in November, but I believe Bub had already at this point dropped his triple-double. Certain outlets maybe hadn't updated their boards. Some were very quick to do so. ESPN did not have him listed. No Ceilings did not have him listed. Bleacher Report had him at 10. Yahoo at 18. Athletic not listed. Tankathon not listed. He ended up 47th ranked prospect on the Draft Act IPO with an average stock price of 51.7. Currently, ESPN has him at 25. No Ceilings at 40. Bleacher Report at 38. Yahoo at 22. The Ringer at 23. The Athletic at 22. Tankathon at 34. Average stock price 29.1. 26th ranked prospect on May's draft rankings. So pretty big leap, 20-ish spots there for him from beginning of the year to now. So with that said, Albert, I ask you, is Bub Carrington stock price too high, too low, or just right?
I'm going to say right now that I think his stock price is too low, which is a surprising thing for me to even say, considering I've had him pretty low on my board consistently. And then in the last couple of weeks, I've moved him up a ton. And I think Corey, we're going to get into the scout, but you started off today talking about he's the youngest domestic player we have in this class. And that was something that I really needed to kind of process for myself, where I knew Carrington was young, but thinking about it like over and over again and watching his film again, I actually have multiple scouting reports of Carrington in my notebook because I kind of did the deep dive of him a couple of times this season because I was so confounded by his game. But overall, Corey, I'm going to say it's too low because he's a really, really interesting prospect and he happens to be crazy young. And so I currently have him at 23 on my board. And so, yeah, I've moved him up quite a bit.
I also think it's too low. And I've gotten to the point, I have him in the top 10.
There it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that he is as good a swing as you could take in this draft. And I know that there are guys who came into this preseason as, the lottery projected guys, RSCI rankings, all that stuff. And, that means something, that's worth considering for sure. But at the same time, when I look at his game and I look at the skills, which we'll break down, and I look at his age and I look at his size, and I look at his warts and I say, do I think that they are correctable? I just see a guy who has a very modern game, put up some really impressive production. And if I'm going to swing on a prospect, look, I think that he's shown enough that I'm very, very willing to take him in the lottery. I think for a number of reasons. His skill set, his ability to play with other people. I think his ability to just do things that, at an NBA level, he has an NBA level skill. And I'm excited to talk about that skill in particular and some of the other stuff. I've gotten to a point where some of these other guys, I'm just like, all right, are we just saying that they're lottery prospects because we don't really have any other choice because they were ranked there to start? Or like, are we? I just think that he's as likely a swing as any, man. I was really impressed with him and his game, and we're going to be fair and talk about the stuff he's not good at too. But I'm very, very intrigued by Bub in the long term.
Corey, I think that monologue you just gave, I think, is right on the mark, because let's really call it for what it is. There are some guys that are consistently being discussed in the top 5, in the top 10, that I think you and I, Corey, especially, are low on. And we don't believe deserve to be in that conversation. And meanwhile, I think Carrington is the exact opposite of that, exactly what you're talking about. So if anything, maybe I need to continue to work on where I have him as well, because I don't have him in the top 10, but I'm ready to get into the scout with you, and I can have my mind changed.
I don't even know if the other guys that we're lower on don't deserve to be considered in the top 10. I think they probably do deserve consideration there for a number of reasons. I just think none of these guys really have standout skills that you can bank on and be like, this is what this dude is going to do great at the next level, and this is why it works. And I think Bub probably does have that. And I think he deserves to be there. I mean, Kizis in the comments says this player doesn't deserve praise, but I can see teams getting high on Carrington for the same reasons the Spurs reached on Josh Primo. And look, if we start hearing, hey, Bub Carrington is working his way into the lottery discussion, I'm not going to be shocked, especially like a team like Portland. And we could talk about fits and stuff later. They have 2 picks in the lottery. And like, all right, if they took Bub with one of them and swung, like, dude, I'm with it. Like, even with their pick at 7, like, I think he could play next to Scoot. I think he could play with Simons. I think he could play next to Sharp. Like, I just think this is a kid who's super talented. In this draft, if we're going to talk about how there's not a ton of talent and, it's different than regular drafts, if you're going to swing, like, this is a dude you can swing on. So I think it's time to kind of like break down his game a little bit. Where do you want to start, with the actual like skill breakdowns?
Let's keep it kosher, Corey. We'll keep it as we always do. Let's start with the shooting. Okay.
Because I think the shooting, there's a lot to discuss with it. Right, because this is what he does. He shoots a lot, like not like he shoots a lot like Cam Thomas shoots a lot,
right?
But like his shot diet is a lot of jumpers, right? So talk to me about his shooting, because if you look at the numbers, pretty pedestrian. 41% from the field, 32.2% from 3, 78.5% from the line is pretty good. So where are you at with his shooting?
I think the first thing that I want to say, Corey, I think what you just said about the diet is really important. He took a lot of them, but this is how I'm framing things and what I wrote in my notes for the pod today. What we saw from Carrington in terms of his shooting display at Pitt, take it however you want to take it, right? Let's say you're on the low end and you're like, I didn't like what I saw, or you're on the high end and you really liked what you saw. I can see it both ways. I think what we saw at Pitt was actually the floor of the type of shooter that he's going to be. So this was, in my mind, the foundation of the type of shooter that I think Bub Carrington is actually going to be. And that is considering all the warts, all the good, all the bad, everything in between. I think Carrington, what we saw in his freshman season at Pitt, that shooting display, the efficiency, everything is the absolute floor with him, is the conclusion that I walked away with.
I feel the same way, honestly. Like I wrote, like, I think he's going to be an above average shooter, even with the blah efficiency. I think he's got good form, especially up top. High volume of 3-point attempts. So 32.2% on threes. but it was on 11 threes per 100 possessions. And that is like real deal shooting volume. And a lot of those threes were very difficult shots off the bounce, which goes into his tough shot diet. But he is an excellent off the dribble guy. I think he might be the best off the bounce shooter in this entire draft. And that includes Rob Dillingham. Now, Dillingham, clearly a better percentage wise, like from distance. But if we're just looking at straight up like dribble jumpers, Bub Carrington scored more, like hit a higher percentage of dribble jumpers. Now, maybe the efficiency could be a little bit lower because of the 3-point disparity, but just as far as dribble jumpers go, Bub Carrington is a really, really impressive off the dribble shooter. Confident with a hand in his face. Sometimes some of these shots, maybe it's like a little too confident, and this goes into where we get into some of his warts. He can pull up in transition, stop on a dime and shoot, and he does that a lot. Honestly, sometimes I would like him to not do that, and I'd like him to attack the cup. But I digress. Off balance shots, like off DHOs and stuff. I'm with it. I think the shooting, like the catch and shoot stuff, I think needs to get better. I think that his shot prep is not always like excellent when he's like spacing. I think, he's not like consistently hopping, or he's not like consistently stepping into it. So I think he's got like some work to do there, but like I said, he's very, very, very young. So I think it's workable. But he is always balanced, and like up top, it looks really, really good. And so I am in on the shooting, but there are certainly things that he's going to, need to shore up. But like you said, I think that this is kind of what his floor looks like as a shooter as well. And when you talk about the kind of shots that he's able to shoot, man, I mean, again, like he can get into he can create space. He can shoot with a hand in his face. He can shoot not. I just think it's a really, really valuable skill set for him, so that's where I'm at.
Corey, I love everything that you said. A couple of things that I wrote down here. First off, I hate that you beat me to the punch, because I actually feel exactly the same in terms of I think he's the best dribble jump shooter in the class. And I didn't expect to feel that way, because when I did his initial scouting report in January, a lot of my notes were like, damn, like I wish the decision making was a little bit better. I wish the shot die was a little bit healthier, with some of the stuff that I wrote down. And then as I got into later in the season, something that I wanted to highlight, his efficiency, as you mentioned, wasn't great, but it was consistent, whether it was, throughout the season or in conference play. It was right about pretty similar, which I want to give him credit for. But at the same time, it kind of is what it is, right? He stayed consistent throughout the season. As you mentioned, Corey, I think there's something about his lower half. Sometimes like his legs and his knees look a little strange at times on shots, which I think easy to clean up, because ultimately the shot at the top does look clean, like you said. I think his handle is good. I think he creates good separation. Metcalf wrote a piece about him earlier in the season, compared him to SGA, but of course, guys, don't overreact. Metcalf wasn't saying that Bub was going to be SGA. It's just that in the way that Bub was creating separation, there were hints of SGA and how he did that. And so I wanted to give Metcalf a shout out on that, because I thought he wrote a really, really, really good piece on him. And just watching Carrington, you can see it. The mid-range stuff, really nice. The way that he can pull up and he takes it with so much confidence, and like his decisiveness coming off ball screens is really great to see. As you mentioned, Corey, and we'll get into the at-rim finishing and all that stuff later, but I think sometimes, even with his outside shooting, if you watch his misses, sometimes they're like really short. And I think that also comes from strength. I think there's a strength piece overall with Bub that we're going to have to continue to see, I think, in his lower half and his upper body. But the reason why I really moved Carrington up a ton on my board was because watching him at the combine, as you mentioned, Corey, he weighed in at 195. And in my mind, from what I saw, you could actually see his gain of mass. Like he actually looked bigger, a little bit thicker overall. And for me, it's like, well, if he's going to be playing at 6'5", 6'5.5" in shoes, have that type of mass, and have all the shot space creation, quickness to him then obviously he becomes way more interesting. But the biggest thing with me with Carrington and his shooting, I just feel like he's got the confidence, number one. And that's something that I wrote about even in my piece for PJ Hall that's coming out this week. There are a lot of guys who are theoretical shooters, and you kind of get caught up in like the nitty gritty of their jump shots. But at the end of the day, like mechanics aside, if a guy's not willing to take the shots, then you'll never really freaking know if they can shoot it or not. And I think the thing that I liked about Carrington in his freshman season was that he wasn't shy. The numbers back it up. You already went over those numbers. He was willing to take the shots. He was a freshman on that team, and he took a lot of the responsibility on offense to put up, to number one, take tough shots, but also make tough shots. And I think that should be a part of his evaluation, and we should give him credit for that as well.
Yeah, spot on there. A lot of people in the chat are, mentioning kind of the Spurs again, another team with 2 top picks. We talk about them all the time, like guard creators. Like, if he went 8 to the Spurs, like would that be shocking to me? To me, no. Maybe at where we're at right now in the process, still maybe before like we start hearing the lead up to the draft and the intel that comes out with that, maybe it would be shocking. But like I can see that, I really can. But yeah, to me, all the theoretical stuff, like you said, like he's showing the shots he's willing to take, and the fact that he's able to knock down these tough shots. I mean, dude, he had some shots against Clemson, like that. I was like, he went on a little run. I was like, woo! Like that is a crazy high level NBA shot. And like, there are just these flashes of shot creation and stuff that are just super important. Like just straight up one of the best, like get a bucket shot makers in the class. And I if not the best, like you said, and I think there's value in that. Didn't get a ton into like didn't get a ton of floaters off, but like the floaters that he did take, you could tell he has good touch because he's so comfortable pulling up in at like the elbow area and shooting those like long 15-foot jumpers, that he doesn't always probe and get a little bit deeper to get into the floater range. And part of that is just like him, attacking all the way to the cup. And I'm sure we're going to get into the finishing very, very shortly, but like the fact that he can like snake a ball screen and then rise up, and he doesn't have to be fully set, but he's still able to maintain balance in the air and get like good, like solid looks off to where it doesn't feel like he's just chucking it. Like I don't know, like there are shots like sometimes where you're like, all right, like we can rein that in, and that's part of like being young, and we can learn from that with shot selection. That's normal for a lot of these young prospects. But at the same time, I do feel like a lot of his like the shots he was taking, it's more like, can we get deeper and get to the rim instead of pulling up there? Like but they don't feel like forces necessarily. It just feels like him getting to a spot he's comfortable at.
Yeah.
And he's going to have to learn how to get downhill a little bit more, and maybe with the added strength. And I feel like he was attacking a little bit more towards the end of the season. Yeah. But maybe as he continues to fill out, we'll see more of that stuff, and it'll be a more like appropriate shot diet. Because right now, like honestly, one of the reasons he is such a tough prospect to predict, and you can't be like, well, this is a certainty that he's going to be like a star or like even like a really good starting point guard or something. It's just like there are not a lot of dudes that fit his profile.
Mm-hmm.
Only 14% of his possessions were at the rim. Like the volume on his rim stuff is just super, super low. You know what I mean? Like in a lot of ways, he's kind of like the anti-Judah Mintz. So like, to be perfectly honest, it also, I feel like kind of shows like from that position, the value of shot making for a guard like that versus like the ability to get to the rim and not be able to make shots. Like, I just think teams are going to value what Bub brings versus a guy like Judah, who's ball dominant and like has to get downhill to generate good offense. But like, I don't think it's like Keyshawn George doesn't like, he lacks burst, right? Like, like he's almost like slow-mo, like in slow motion. Yeah. And he's huge. And like, if he puts on strength, like I'm sure he won't have, a ton of trouble getting to the rim. But Bub is like 6'5", 6'8" wingspan right now, close to 200 pounds. Like he'll continue to fill out. Like I think he's a little bit quicker. Like he's quicker than Keyshawn Georges. So like I don't think it's like a quickness issue. I think it's for him, he just feels so comfortable in the mid range and like he feels like he can get to good shots almost at any point. Which is why he doesn't get downhill a ton. But it's like there aren't a lot of guards that like only shoot that percentage of shots at the rim. Like Tyler Hero, I think, like Mike Conley and like old Mike Conley. So it is rare, and he is going to have to make a more concerted effort to drive to the basket. And like I wouldn't even necessarily say he's a bad finisher at this point, because I don't think the sample is really large enough to say he's a bad finisher. Yeah. But it's also not large enough to be like he's a good finisher either, you know, like, so you have to kind of go on like what the film says. And like there are times when he shows pretty good touch and whatnot. I really like when he does attack the rim, he has these strides and he'll use to extend and get to the rim and create a little bit more separation. So there are things to like, but you know, it's just let's change the diet up a little bit. We don't have to take ice cream completely out, but let's cut down on the ice cream a little bit.
For sure. More salads. But Corey, no, I agree. I think the biggest thing something you said earlier that I think is really, really important. You said that when he comes off a ball screen, sometimes in your mind, you're like, damn, I wish you kind of took it all the way. And sometimes you'll see him take a mid-range jumper and you're like, in your head, you're like, I wish he went all the way. While I was watching Bub, I 100% agree with you, Corey. There are a couple of possessions I was like, dude, like the cup is there for you to take it. But I think in his mind, he would come off of these screens, and I thought he did a really good job of coming off screens, which I know it feels like a minor. Pace. Exactly. It might seem like a minor detail to people, but that's really, really important if you're a point guard that is going to play in a lot of ball screen possessions. Like being able to time that perfectly, get the right angles, and like really have your guy go into the screen is an important thing. But in my mind, Corey, I thought it was like, I thought his mindset was, oh, I got to the spot that I freaking wanted to get to. So this is a win for me type of thing. Right.
Albert, of course, I would love ask him that at some point soon if we happen to talk to him.
Great lead. A little foreshadowing there. Love it. But Corey, I think ultimately, as you mentioned, that's why you get to the NBA, and that's why these coaches get paid millions of dollars, right? Is to work on that type of stuff, fix those types of things. And I do want to talk about his finishing here, because I love everything that you said. I think the sample size is way too small for us to make a definitive statement on him as a finisher. However, there were enough, I think, flashes and shades of things for us to at least talk about it, right?
Yeah.
The first thing that I want to say, the first thing I wanted to say, quickness is there. I read somewhere, I don't remember where I read it, but they were saying that he's not a good athlete and that he wasn't fast. And I was like, well, okay, that's fine. I mean, you're entitled to your own opinion, but I was like, I think he's pretty damn quick. Right. And I want to give him that. Number two, I really like his extension when he does get to the rim. I think he does a good job of using his length to, attempt some difficult layups that might be difficult for other people. Right. The one thing that I did notice, though, is, and this comes with the lack of strength. Right. There were times that he would get to the cup and you would see him kind of avoid the contact. Now, in my mind, with the weight that he was at, right, and before, and maybe the lack of strength, I think that's all understandable. If he was the weight he is now and he has the strength and all that stuff, then I think it would have turned out differently. I think it was just at that point in his development, at that point in the season, he was just making the best decision considering the lack of strength that he had, is kind of how I'm thinking about it. Because, Corey, I didn't think he was afraid of contact, nor did I think it was something that he was trying to avoid. I just think time to time, he just made the best decision for himself. And I hope that makes sense, because if he was afraid of contact, I don't think he would have had as like aggressive, like there were a good chunk of drives that he had at the basket that were really aggressive, that were almost violent, right? And my thing was like, if you're afraid of contact, I don't think you would have it in you to even try some of the drives that he did. And so I want to start there. I think it's something that, as you mentioned, we need to see more of. And then also one last thing, I think his offhand finishing, what came and went. Like, I think there are some that were really nice and then some that he absolutely bricked. And I was like, okay, so we know that you have it, and we also know that you're not afraid. Let's continue to work on that. So I think my overall evaluation of his finishing was that, number one, as you mentioned, the volume was really low. And I think it was okay, but it can be better. I think the strength aspect will make it better. And then him working on that offhand finishing will continue to make it better. But I think the foundation of him having the quickness, about the good angles that he takes and the length that he has, I think all those factors with coaching and time and development in his body will lead to him actually being a good finisher, is kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, look, I think that he will get to like league average finishing. At the I don't think he's going to be Kyrie around the rim or anything, but I think that he's going to be league average eventually. I think the strength plays a big part of it. Like early in the season, especially, he would because he doesn't have like the same like straight line speed as like an Isaiah Collier.
Right.
If a guy would be on his hip, you want to see the guy with the ball initiate the first bump so you don't get bumped off your spot. And he kind of would get bumped off his spot, and he would have to kind of fade away on his attempts at the rim.
Yes.
Instead of like really going into the contact and drawing a foul and getting to the free throw line where he's a good free throw shooter. He attacked more aggressively towards the end of the season, it seemed like. And then in that, he was then navigating how to do that. So like, that's where you would see some of the inconsistency with the offhand. Sometimes he would do kind of like, get into traffic, do the little like carryover move, keep the carry cradle thing, like go up. And sometimes it would be like good touch. Sometimes it wouldn't. Sometimes he would kind of try to like do like the decel and then like come back. And instead of finishing with the left, he'd kind of like put it up with the right and like an off balance thing. He did a couple of times against UNC. I think one of the times he got fouled and it went in. One of the times he missed it. And it was like, maybe if you just keep going straight and taking your momentum, you do draw the foul. So I think that, like you said, the sample is not quite big enough to like make a definitive statement on the results either way. If he comes in and he struggles around the rim, because there's going to be bigger, stronger defenders in the NBA, or not comes in, he's going to come in, he's going to struggle like most of these guys. But like, down the line when he's a seasoned pro, if he's like not the best finisher at the rim, I'm not going to be shocked, because he's got to deal with, Embiid and Gobert and Vic and all these guys. So, but also if he figures it out and he's able to like figure out how to mess with the shot diet. And I think that's why like he's going to be hard to guard, because you're going to have to play up as a big, a little bit higher up in the drop, because he's going to be able to come off the screen and bury a mid-range jumper. He's going to feel comfortable doing that. It's why I kind of want to see the floater a little bit more, because now you want to get a guy backpedaling. You just want like to be unpredictable, and the more ways he can be unpredictable. And I think he already has the steps in his game to get to unpredictability, to where like if he doesn't have the same, like burst as some of these other guys who get to the rim all the time, that's fine. Like he doesn't need to just run as fast as he can to the rim. Like he can play at different speeds and with different pace. Like I think that's the thing that we see. Like the NBA now, like the guys who play with the ball in their hands, you need to play with pace. If you can play with pace and you can be manipulative and make decisions in a really patient manner, and you know how to get to spots on the floor, you're going to be able to get to your spots on the floor. If you have to rely on just barreling into guys, that's not how the game works when the stakes are the highest all the time. At least not when you're like a guy who plays with the ball in their hands all the time. You might be Josh Hart making a 45 cut and like you get the ball and you just run in a straight line as fast as you can because you're a maniac and you'd run through a brick wall for the Knicks. And like sometimes that could work. But like if you're a guy who plays with the ball in your hands, you have to be a little bit more cerebral in what you're doing. And I think he can do that. And I think him being cerebral, and we've talked about his scoring for so long, like this is all to say, like he can also pass and like make plays, and he can make like whatever play. Like he can make all of the plays,
Yep.
He like for a guy who did play with the ball in his hands a lot, like he only had like a 23% usage rate, which is not like super crazy. So he's a guy that you can see playing off of other guys. And that's part of what I like about him, like coming off DHOs and being able to shoot off balance. That's why we need him to, become a more consistent spot up shooter. But like he is, I think, going to be capable of doing that. I can foresee that. But then the playmaking stuff, and him being able to do like every read. He could hit the pocket pass. He's got the height that he can throw over and hit the roller over the top. He can make the throw over the throwbacks to the pop man. He can paint the corners and the wings, the weak side. Like he can make the jump passes or whatever. Like he's very creative. But for a guy that we're saying is the youngest prospect in this draft, domestically, and one of the youngest overall, he only had a 13% turnover rate too in the ACC. And he's a creative passer. Like, it's not like he was just making like the one more. Like, this is a dude who has real passing upside to go along with the pull-up stuff. So, and like, because he's got this pull-up stuff, he's going to force rotations. He's going to make guys have to rotate over, and he's going to be able to hit these windows. If he was just a pull-up scorer, I'd be like, not that interesting.
Right.
Like, somewhat interesting, but, maybe not that interesting because he can't fit. But the fact that he can make plays too is what makes him so appealing to me on the offensive side of the ball.
Corey, I love what you said. 24% assist percentage this season. Freshman guard. As you mentioned, not gigantic usage, 23%, turnover percent, 13. Like, it's special stuff. And he's also 6'5". And I'm going to say he's 6'5" because he's playing in shoes.
Yes.
So I'd rather just focus on what he's playing in shoes. So he's 6'5", maybe even 6'5.5", depending on what he's wearing. I love it, right? When bigs hard hedge and they blitz or whatever, he's going to be able to make that pass over the top. Something we saw with Brunson in the playoffs. A lot of times he'd get blitzed, and sometimes, the length and the size was a little overwhelming, and you'd see a little bit of delay in the Knicks getting into their offense. And I think with Bub, with his size and his length, and his vision, I think it's going to get really, really fun. And depending on what team he ends up with, right, like the type of stuff he'll be able to do in ball screens as a shooter, of course. And I was listening to the Russillo pod today, and he was talking with Tim Legler, and Legler was talking about ball screens and how when James Naismith created the game and he was explaining ball screens to the kids, he's probably telling them, when you get off a ball screen, your first instinct is to shoot. Right, you're getting a clean look so you can get a bucket, right? And the reason why he brought it up, because he was talking about Tyrese Halliburton and some of his inconsistencies in that Knicks series, right? Like in Game 5, he went MIA, and a couple other, I think Game 1, 2, he was kind of missing. But the overall conversation was about, if you're a guard and you're coming off a ball screen and you got a clean look, the first thought in your head should be to score, right? Regardless of you being an unselfish player or whatever. And with Bub, it's the same thing. Like, he's going to come off these ball screens and he's going to think to score. However, what he's been able to show, and the numbers and the advanced numbers back it up, Corey, is that when the defense isn't giving him that jumper, right, he has the wherewithal and the passing ability to make the correct pass wherever it is on the floor. And I think that is such an important thing with Carrington, in that, number one, he has that scoring instinct as his main priority, but also his passing stuff is way above average. He's a very, very good passer with real vision, with anticipation, and the fact that he has the size and length to make the passes over taller defenders is what makes him really, really interesting. So, Corey, I love everything that you said, and I think the fact that he can do the fun stuff, some of the live dribble passes with him have been really, really fun. As I mentioned,
eye manipulation.
Exactly. Eye manipulation is a big one too. We love that, especially, us 90s guys watching like Jason Williams, Mike Bibby, Stephon Marbury. Like they did a lot of that back in the day. But no, he's really good, man. He's really, really good.
Yeah, I think he's really interesting. Mr. Ray in the chat says, if we're talking upside, I think Bub is in the top 5 of the entire class. Kid has game, just requires refinement and seasoning. I think that's a pretty good argument to be made for that, to be completely honest. But yeah, like honestly, the passing and the fact that he's a decision maker. Like I think you can be a really creative passer, but not be a good decision maker. I think you can be have really good vision, but not be like a good decision maker. And I think when you're young, and like all the, the prospects we talk about are mostly young, and even the older guys are not done developing by any means. But like, so I think sometimes you can explore the studio space and it's fine. But like, he's already at the point where like, he's already proven that he's going to make solid decisions with the ball. And it's not something you have to guess and hope gets better. You're going to be able to trust him to be able to do that. So like, a lot of the bet is going to be like, on him getting stronger. And I think that he has a good frame to do it. And I wasn't sure, that the long sleeve tee really threw me off earlier, but like, I think, like you said, you could see at the combine that he looked a little bit bigger. It seems like he's putting in work in the weight room, and he came in at 195, and I thought that was a really positive sign for him to get to, like, I feel NBA teams, some of the teams I've talked to, like 200 is like, where you want to be at as a guard. Now he's a bigger guard, so you hope that he's going to be, stronger than that. And I think he can get stronger than that. But I think that he is on a really good trajectory physically right now. Now, do you have anything else on his offense that you think we missed or you want to hit?
I did want to ask you about his handle because, Corey, I think with what we saw in his freshman season, I thought his handle was good, but I also did feel like there was a wildness and looseness to his handle at times, and also not all the time, just sometimes. And also there were some times where I felt like he played a little sped up, but I don't necessarily mean that to be like it's a major issue. I say it because I think that's also like a developmental youth type of thing where maybe the lack of strength was part of it as well. Just something I wanted to bring up.
I don't know. I think I think his handle is like really, really good. Like I think he's a really, really good ball handler. Like I think he's one of the best ball handlers in the class. I think he's pretty much got it on a string. And I think that like sometimes when he does see pressure, like he has like these like little behind the backs to like play into space instead of like continuing his momentum. I don't know. I'm pretty confident about his handle. I mean, look, he's a young 18-year-old kid like playing in the ACC. So like, sure, like, are there times he's going to look sped up? I think so, especially as he started garnering more attention. Like when you come out of the gate, you drop a triple double out of nowhere and you're a little unheralded. You might take people by surprise, but all of a sudden you do that, you pop up on Bleacher Report's mock at number 10 or whatever right away. Like now you're all of a sudden the number one guy on the scouting report, and it's not like Pittsburgh had a lot of other guys that could create. So there was a lot of pressure on him to handle it. But the fact that like he wasn't turning it over and when he was pressured, either as a ball handler or, a passer or whatever, I thought were really good signs. Shout out again to everybody in the comments. Victor Wembanyama asked a question, Spurs based, causing some stirs in the comments. Honestly, there's been so many comments, that I just can't go through and find it again. But, maybe we'll touch on it at the end if we have time. We do Q&As and stuff, but, we got to get through Bub Carrington and Isaiah Collier here. But I would not, if I was the Cavaliers, I would not take the trade package that you offered from what I remember for Darius Garland, who I still think is very good. Okay. Defensively, what did you think about him defensively? I guess now and projecting it.
I'm going to give you all my thoughts at once, Corey, because I didn't have a ton of thoughts on his defense.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that I wanted to say, only 8 blocks, 18 steals on the season. I'll just put that down. Mm-hmm. Didn't love that. He wasn't like a
low steal and block rates for sure.
Correct. Wasn't a wildly productive playmaker on the defensive side of the ball. I thought lateral movement was okay. I didn't think it was outstanding. However, size and length kind of covered a lot of that at times. I think overall, my biggest thing about him was that I thought that he grew and progressed as a defender throughout the season. Mm-hmm. I thought especially at the end of the season, his screen navigation actually improved a ton, where I felt like he was getting destroyed less on screens and did a really good job of snaking those and getting around them pretty well. My overall conclusion with him as a defender is that it is not going to be his marquee skill. I do not think he will be known as a defender. However, I did not think it was bad. I think it was just a thing where he was 18. He was a little bit on the weaker end. And you saw on defense, especially, there were times where you kind of saw the lack of strength. However, the biggest thing that made me walk away with some optimism is that I thought it really did progress throughout the season. And that was kind of enough for me. And it was enough for me to be like, I think he'll be fine.
Yeah. I I'll touch on the defense just quickly. Free J in the comments says, "How is Bub without the ball?" Highlights, I see he's ball dominant with the ball. I think the fact that I think he can play with or without the ball. I thought like even when he had the ball, he was quick to like play off of Diaz Graham and like pitch it back to him, then come off a handoff. He would space the floor a lot.
Good cutter too. Sneaky.
Yeah, he would, and you can run him off screens. Like he didn't do it a ton, but like he looked really comfortable doing it. And a lot of the handoffs he would come off was like running off of motion and movement and stuff. So I'm a buyer in the fact that I think that that's kind of like why I buy into him a lot, is that I think he's going to be able to play with other guards who also need the ball in their hands. So yeah, defensively, I like that he gets low in his stance. I like his length. 6'8" wingspan is solid. I think he moves his feet well. I wish that he put more ball pressure on sometimes and really got into guys' shirts and really made them work. I think that would help with the screen navigation a little bit. And so that, because he's playing off a few feet when he gets hit with a screen, now he's really got it takes a lot of effort to chase over, instead of if he's more attached to him, he'd be able to kind of like slither around the screen a little bit more. He definitely, again, needs to get stronger, and he will. There are times, he'd get bumped off his spot. Guy would dip their shoulder. Again, this is pretty normal stuff for freshman dudes. Off the ball, and I'd love to ask him. Sometimes it seemed like he was kind of like in denial on his man, and he would like turn his back to the ball sometimes. And like sometimes you would understand, like if he's guarding Joe Girardi on Syracuse, like you'd be like, all right, like I get why you're like playing him like that, but other times you're like, I don't know if you really need to focus on this guy off the ball so much. And then other times he showed good instincts where he would like kind of lag when his man would, go to the weak side corner, and he'd be in position to tag and then get back. So I don't know if it was like a schematic thing or like a young thing where it was like inconsistent and he needs just like more reps on that end. So that'll be interesting. Where I'm at is he's 6'5", 6'5.5". He's got a 6'8" wingspan, and he plays hard on that end. And he's not a guy that I'm like, he's going to be targeted. I thought he had a lot of good moments this year. He had some not good moments, and I think that goes along with the territory. But if you're able to bring the skills that I think he has on offense, and you can survive on defense and not be somebody that a team is gonna, just have their mouth start watering, as you get into the playoffs and deeper into the season and stuff, and you're not going to get targeted, I think, that's kind of the baseline level of where you need to be. If he becomes a really great defender and all of a sudden he's Nickeil Alexander-Walker and we weren't expecting it, fantastic. But I think that he will just be, adequate. And so I think that's probably a good thing. Like, again, like I don't think either of these guys that we're talking about were like, these dudes are pit bulls. They could go play for Houston next year and fill Jamal Shedd's role, right? Like that's not what. But I think that right now, like I like the signs that I saw. I think he's going to be fine at the next level, and I like where, the chat. Somebody asked, like, I want to know your opinion on Collier versus Bub. Norin Rad in the chat says Carrington versus Collier. Wow, I have Carrington mocked at 22, Collier at 23. So I think this is a good transition now to start getting into. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, I mean we have to sell me this pen on Bub Carrington.
All right, here we go. When it comes to Bub Carrington, it's as simple as he was as Corey mentioned, he is the youngest domestic player in this class. An absolute shooter, a bucket getter, a guy who can really shoot it from outside and in the mid range. Has got a good handle to him, real passing chops to him as well. You put him in a ball screen and he's going to know what to do. And the thing with him is I truly believe that what we saw from him as a shooter in college is the floor. He's only going to get better. He's going to become more efficient. We know that he can make decisive decisions coming off of these ball screens, and a guy that you can see playing, as we've talked about, both on and off the ball. I think he's actually a sneaky good cutter, a guy who moves really well off ball, and I think he's going to continue to develop as a catch and shoot jump shooter. So considering all those things, you should probably use a high-end pick on a guy like that, because offense is always at a premium. You need guys who can put the ball in the basket in the modern NBA. And so I think Bub Carrington would be a great choice for a lot of teams picking towards the middle, top, anywhere in the draft, honestly.
All right. So last thing before we move on, actually, and Smooth Hoops in the chat says Bub is in that Keontae George mold, and he just made the all-rookie team, and I like Bub even more than I like George. So, and I mentioned that comment because Keontae's the guy that I had on my list here. So if you're buying stock in Bub Carrington, who may you have bought stock in previously?
Dude, this was really, really hard for me. I think somebody in the chat before mentioned CJ McCollum.
On my list.
I think that's very interesting. Honestly, Corey, when we talked about it before, I think his size, length, offensive diet, archetype, all that stuff made it really, really difficult for me to find somebody. I'm actually going to defer to you on that one, because the only one that I could really think of was CJ. And I don't think that was the best one.
You know what? I think CJ is pretty good. Just because CJ's not a dude who puts a lot of pressure on the rim and does get by with his shot making ability. I did a BART query myself recently, and let me see if I can find it on Twitter. Yeah, so it was assist percentage over 20, defensive rebound over 15, over 10 3-point attempts per 100 possession freshman, and it was D'Angelo Russell and Cole Anthony. So I could see a little bit of the D-Lo.
Yeah.
But no bounce Anthony Simons. Less bounce Anthony Simons. He only had 2 dunks. So maybe no bounce Anthony Simons. So, but like that kind of style, I think, but guys who don't put like a ton of pressure on the rim and mostly get by with their shot making, but also have a little bit of playmaking to their bag too. And guys that can play on and off the ball, most importantly, I think.
I have one. I don't know if you're going to love it, but
I'd love to hear it.
It would feel weird for me to not throw in a 90s guy. What about a little bit taller, right-handed Nick Van Exel? Just throwing that out there.
Well, I love Nick. Nick the Quick. Love Nick Van Exel. I could see it. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially like later on in his career, like what Van Exel became.
Dallas.
And stuff. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Like this guy who, was a point guard early on, later on became kind of like a, undersized off guard, playing with Nash and whatever. I think kind of interesting, but then also Van Exel had so much sauce. But then Carrington does too. So anyway, Nick Van Exel.